Let's blow this up.
Look alive, Bomb Squad. It is time for another installment of Let's Blow This Up. I am your host, Jason Sircone. It is damn good to be back on the microphone and talking with you once again today. We've got a great conversation ahead, and to talk about the ins and outs of podcast production and how that relates to monetizing, growing, utilizing your podcast within your brand. I know there's a lot that I can say about this on my own, and I know that I have on past episodes and on other podcasts. But for this episode, I wanted to bring in somebody that is known the world over as a very big authority in this space. So we're going to learn audio is in this woman's blood, and we're going to talk about that to kick things off. So without further ado, I would like to welcome to the stage Traci DeForge. Traci, it's a pleasure to have you here on Let's Blow This Up this evening.
Absolutely. It is so fun to be here right now. I've really been looking forward to our conversation today. Just all of our previous communications we've had in advance of today. Really excited to be here.
Likewise, I've learned a ton about you on LinkedIn, and as I was getting ready for our conversation, I learned that audio goes back for you as far as having the transistor radio under your pillow as a child. If it couldn't run any more deep than that.
I know. I said to my team, we had an operations meeting this week, and we were talking about audio and video and all of the things that are changing in our industry. And I just said, you guys just have to understand something about me. This is not a PR plug. This isn't a PR moment for me. Like, I eat, breathe, and sleep the power of audio ever since I literally used to sleep with an AM transmitter radio, listening to ghost stories of all things under my pillow. But I was sharing with you earlier too, it's even broader than that, because my dad was the president of the March of Dimes when I was growing up, and they had the live radio remotes. And I was one of those people who liked to call in and request 2 out of 3 ain't bad from Meatloaf. And just like my friends would come over for slumber parties, and I would produce full on radio shows that we would record on cassettes, including Dr. Pepper commercials. So I can't get away from it. It is who I am.
That takes me back, and I can't believe I'm even pulling this memory from so deep in the recesses. But I remember when I was a little kid, I was big into music, and I would always listen to the radio station. And I grew up in a small town where they only had one radio station, and they had an AM and an FM, and the music they played was not the same music that I was listening to. And I remember always calling in and requesting these bands that I was into, like Guns N' Roses and Bon Jovi and Motley Crue, and it was more of a contemporary station. And I always wondered, why aren't my requests getting on the air? And then I got older and realized, dude, you were nowhere near that playlist.
Oh my gosh. I know. Fast forward for me working in the radio industry for 20 plus years, I can almost, like, my heart breaks for you, because I know those playlists are extremely well researched. And even some of the call-in request shows, unfortunately, these days anyway, are kind of still strategically put in. So it's gone are those days where they actually would, like, take your request and then, drop it down and play it. So
yeah, that's something I've noticed about radio these days is they've got, I mean, you even hear this on the satellite stations. They've got a very set playlist where every now and then they're going to work in a new song or two to keep somewhat of a fresh feel to things. But overall, you're getting those same several songs from the same bands, not necessarily at the same time, but it gets very, very deliberate after a while, and you can almost just make the playlist yourself if you didn't want to go to that extreme. But that's where we're at.
Can tie it back too, which I think is interesting to even parlay this into where the podcasting industry is right now, is because at that time, the window of time that we're talking about was really the heyday of when radio had its most popular moments, if you will, although it's still a very strong platform, don't get me wrong. Mm-hmm. But as technology has advanced and the ability to automate stations and things like that, then also provided a lot more access to data and research and audience demographics and targeted audience reach and all of those things. Not only were able to craft formats for radio shows that would reach that contemporary radio demographic very targeted, spot on. But it also enabled the advancement in advertising and monetization and sales to be able to explode into radio as well. And now we're seeing that with podcasting right now. We're seeing people take the format and the production of their shows so much more seriously. And as a result of that, as the industry, I've been doing this, it's specifically podcasting for the last decade. And to be able to access the target demographics, and that's always been something that's been held podcasting back to a degree from a monetization perspective. So I say this to encourage everyone who's listening to say, like, strap in, because the data is coming. The technology has advanced considerably. The ability to produce your show has advanced considerably in just the last few years. So it's only going to grow bigger and stronger. And if you look at those two parallels, I think it gives us a lot of optimism.
Oh, I agree. I think our medium is stronger now than it's ever been. And we have so many new developments that are coming along that still really haven't reached their full potential. So once we all as podcasters learn to adapt to these new tools and utilize them, understand more about the data that's in front of us, it's only going to help us grow a stronger production. And for people that are using this to grow their brands, I think that's critical, because that audio component can do so much, but there's so much new that goes along with that. Obviously, video podcasting has become a tremendous element that's more, well, I would say just as powerful as audio, because I know how you feel about audio. I would not want to insult. And I feel the same way.
No, you're not, though. I do think it's an important conversation to have, though, because I mean, I've gone through a metamorphosis really in the last 6 months. So our company was audio only when we started. I mean, it's produce your podcast. It wasn't produce your video podcast. And
Right.
So it was produce your podcast. And really over the last, well, we added video into our podcasting services in 2022. So let's just say we've been in it now for 2 years. And for us, as it evolved, we were an audio production company who supplemented our audio podcasters with some video. And then in 2023, we were an audio and video production company, but video was still an add-on. It wasn't necessarily a primary inquiries weren't about it. People weren't seeing it as a necessary, thing that they had to have for their marketing strategy. And then fast forward 2024 till now, it is like our entire language around our packaging has had to be refigured, because even if you are an audio only podcast, you still need video support assets to grow your show. So I have not detoured in any way off of my passion or offended by being so powerful and standing so strongly around the power of audio. But I do recognize, as an industry innovator and just the industry trends themselves, if you don't embrace it, then you're going to get left behind. But to me, it's how you choose to embrace it, and not just throw audio out the window, because that would be absolutely insane. Radio preceded television, if people actually think about it.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
So it's been here longer, and it's going to always have a place, and a strong place in storytelling and branding and brand voice. Yeah. But you can't ignore the big giant Google's owning YouTube's and the influence that they have over the need for video. Agreed. And so you got to play, right? You got to play, mm-hmm. but you got to do it on your own terms. And I think that's been the 3-year-old temper tantrum in me the last 6 months, being, I don't want to be a video podcast production company. But I think I am an audio and video production company, because the demand needs that, supports that, and it's a critical component for growth.
Yeah, I could not agree with that more. And I was very similar when I first started podcasting. We didn't have a video element whatsoever, because it just wasn't what we did. And at that time period, this was 2015. I mean, the first podcast I ever recorded was at a noisy bar with just our little microphones set up with the computer. And it was a silly,
I love it.
But it was what it was. And we grew and evolved and got better and got smarter about what we were doing. But video really didn't become a factor for me until I started getting into doing it with Skype. And that was a couple podcasts later. And mm-hmm. I realized the opportunities that I had, because at that point I'm in Pittsburgh and I was doing the majority of my podcast recordings with local personalities, which was great. There was nothing wrong with that. But then I realized, because this video element is at my fingertips, I have the ability to reach out to people across the globe. and ended up interviewing people in other countries and having some great connections because of that. And that's when I hear people say they only want to do one or the other. I always ask why, because we have the ability to do both at the same time. And discounting one or disqualifying one altogether seems short-sighted because there's so many purposes that each are going to serve. The
Right.
audio component is so important because someone can consume this content when they're on the go. It's harder to do that in the car. If you're watching a video, I highly recommend that you stop doing that. Wait for the audio component, right? And
Right.
same with the written component that can come from the transcripts. Plays an important role, but you can only consume that in a certain setting as well. So if you
Exactly. And
try
you
to take
don't want
one or
to
the other out,
alienate, right. And you don't want to
bingo,
alienate
bingo.
or leave out a possible audience that you could reach with your voice and your message by trying to think of them as mutually exclusive. What
Mm-hmm.
I will say to people though is that this is why it's so incredibly important to invest on the front end and talk to an expert like yourself and myself about strategy,
Mm-hmm.
because the
Mm-hmm.
strategy of balancing the audio and the video content and cross promoting it, but really even fundamentally coming down to actually the production element of it. Because when you are producing a piece of content that is going to both be watched and be listened to, and you take that for granted or minimize the fact that, oh, I'm just going to rip the audio off this video and just upload it because I can reach a more audience that way.
Yeah.
That is just fundamentally so broken, because people like the audio experience, especially, is so incredibly intimate, and people like to feel included in the experience because most often they're listening alone, but they want to be a part of, like the people who are listening to this podcast right now, they can't necessarily see my background. For example, my background has, a variety of colorful thumbnails of podcasts that we've produced over the years. But if
Mm-hmm.
you were just to say, hey, cool background, and I was like, yeah, thanks, and someone was just listening to the audio, immediately psychologically, they are left out. And it
Yeah.
may not even be a conscious decision on that goes through their mind, but I guarantee you, in a subliminal, like internal way, that feeling of being left out is the first fracture in them not returning to your show or sharing your show out to other people. And it's such a simple concept to get around and say, like, if we were to replay it and you were like this, and you were to say, hey, Traci, cool background, I'll be like, thanks. I'm so excited that these tiles that you're seeing on the back of my wall
Yeah.
are
Good
from
visual.
various podcasters that we produced. And at least the person feels included because they can get the theater of the mind of
Mm-hmm.
what it is that we're talking about, and not feel like, oh, she must have a really cool painting or pictures of her kids, or maybe she has awards, or maybe she has a purple wall. Like, nobody knows, right? And so it's a big soapbox for me, you can tell, but I just think it's really strong basics that if you don't have a strategist or you don't have a producer who understands these dynamics, you're going to miss this. And they're such simple, but such just magnitudinally, if that's even a word, big things to consider.
We're going to say that you're coining that phrase, magnitude.
I think I just made that up. Yes.
Right?
The magnitude of these decisions may seem so small,
Yeah.
but the impact is so big. How about that?
That's perfect. But it does speak to the enormity of that. And I've heard podcasts that will pull from webinars, and it's basically this presentation of a slideshow without the visual. And it's just, what am I listening to right now? And a lot of times I've seen that used as like, hey, we're going to do this as episode 43, and they get a week off. I'm doing air quotes for our listeners right now.
Right.
But it's just not a good audio experience at the end of the day. And you're, like you said, Traci, you said it perfectly. That could be the first episode someone finds. And if they think that's what the whole production's all about, they're out. And they're not
You're
coming
done.
back.
They're done.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess in support of the mission that both of you and I are trying to accomplish here, is to educate people, especially on the production side of things.
Mm-hmm.
If that was your client and you did have that scenario happen, again, this is the benefits of working with somebody who can kind of guide and make recommendations for you. I love the idea of content repurposing and being able to create a piece of content one time and repurpose it. But if that was
Mhm.
my client and they were like, I'm gonna repurpose a webinar, I don't have enough time for an episode this week, then I would say, great, we can do that. But here's what we need to do. When you do the intro for this episode, you need to say, hey, everybody, this is going to be a really great episode, but it's going to be heavy on the visuals because I'm taking a webinar and people understand repurposing now, right? They understand that. So you tell your audience like you're talking to a friend up front to expect, listen for the content, but understand your listening experience is going to be a little different this time because there are going to be some slides. And I'm available if you want to email me, or make sure you visit the show notes or read the transcription to get even more clarity. If you just do that,
Mhm.
you can repurpose that webinar because you're already setting an expectation and having that person feel included from the very, very start.
Mhm.
And then they are willing to overlook. They might get a little irritated, but they'll be irritated in a way that, okay, well, he did give me a heads up this was coming. So
Yeah.
if I really want to see the slide, I'll head on over to YouTube and take a look at it.
I
Right?
was yeah, exactly. I was going to say, as long as you give that opportunity for the visual to be a part of it as well. If you want to see what I'm talking about in this episode, the full webinar can be found on my YouTube channel, or reach out to me. I'd be happy to share it with
Yeah.
you. And
Yeah.
that could open up a new opportunity for you as well.
And more downloads on your YouTube, which are
Mhm.
challenging to get organically these days. So it's like you just have to think through. It's just all, to me, it's not about just jumping in and being like, I'm gonna do a podcast. It's like, no, it's like, I'm going to create a thoughtful piece of content that is going to get visibility, leads, and sales for my business. What is the best way for me to do that? Like, start with that question first.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I know I mentioned to you before we got started tonight, Traci, this whole thought process behind production and all these little, and we've not even scratched the surface of all the things that we should be thinking about when it comes to production. We don't have that kind of time this evening. But I feel that many people that look at podcasting, if they're considering taking a DIY route to everything, maybe they don't have the investment money available to have a team come on or to outsource the project, and they want to do it themselves. The production part of it can be even more daunting than the actual interviewing of a guest and putting the content together, because there are all of these elements. And just like learning to be a good host and have these good conversations, you have to develop a skill set around producing a show, editing, making sure conversation flows, doing things right. And these are all things that I learned from experience, because when we did our first podcast back in the day, like I said, the one in Noisy Bar, there was no editing. We didn't know what we were doing. We know how to put theme music on that. We just threw this piece of garbage out on the internet and said we had a podcast. Learning from my own mistakes. Oh, it was crazy. But the learning curve was definitely a little steeper then. It's flattened now. And having that great audio experience, great listener experience, great overall experience around your show is paramount to your success. And it can speak volumes to how successful you are within your business as well. So what are your thoughts on that? And you've been doing production for a long time as well. Have you encountered people that have said, that's too much for me, I just don't want to go down this path, which again makes services that you and I offer very viable? But
Sure.
I would hope that people don't want to run away from this because of it. What are your thoughts on that?
For me, I don't get that level of exchange as frequently as I get, like, I want this, but I don't even know where to start. Right. So
Yeah, that's true.
I absolutely agree that the technology, oh my gosh, between when you and I started our first podcast at the exact same time.
Mhm.
And the difference that's kind of fun, just for the sake of this conversation, to point out is, I love your story because it's indie and it's raw, and it's like we were in a bar and we just had something to say and we wanted to say it, right? And then the learning curve was steeper, but you did it and you got through it.
Mhm.
I was the 180-degree opposite of that. I knew I wanted to start a podcast, and I had worked in broadcast radio for 2 decades, and I was absolutely unwilling to put anything out that wasn't broadcast quality production, that didn't show me in the radio executive, status that I in my brain had. And so I did all the due diligence in terms of digging, and I went back into team members that I'd worked with radio, and I pulled them together, and we literally honed a technology out of the UK to do virtual remote recording sessions like you and I are doing right now, because that didn't exist at the time. And then like created all of these systems and all of this to get my podcast out. Like this wasn't Produce Your Podcast. This was just my first podcast journey to there because I knew too much. Right. So there's such a different dichotomy between somebody like me who knew too much. So I wanted a radio show as a podcast. Right. And you wanted to have a podcast that you were just learning the ins and outs of. And that honestly is why I did pivot after our launch journey to there into starting Produce Your Podcast, because I felt like if brands are going to utilize podcasting to leverage their revenue growth, then they are not going to want to stop down to learn everything that I learned, to pull a team together, to get it produced, to get it marketed, to get it out there. And I'm like, I get to do this again, but I get to do it the way I want to do it in terms of the radio world. But all of that to say, to kind of like answer your exact question, is I think it's like, you got to start where you are. And there are so many opportunities out there to choose from, and to where are you going to host it? How are you going to host it? Where are you going to record it from? How is it going to be distributed? Sorry, gosh, it's later in the day for me. So I've done a lot of talking today. But so I think when you're thinking about an investment, you can get very cost-effective softwares and opportunities and platforms and all of those things. But what you can't replace an investment on is investing in getting the foundation pieces built out right. So when people come to us, I like try to have a conversation with them and be like, if all you can invest in right now is getting it up and going, the first question they're going to ask me is, what microphone do I use? And I'm like, those are important questions, and they're very affordable solutions. But it's what you do behind that mic that is most important. So let's figure out that. And if that's where your do it for you or investment in hiring somebody stops, that's okay. But you're going to be able to have a full strategy that you can lay out.
Yeah, I would rather, if someone came into this with, let's just say $1,000 that they wanted to invest in getting things started, they would probably think that majority, okay, I've got $1,000, I'm going to spend it on a good microphone and the best headphones, and they would probably get top of the line equipment, but not invest a nickel into talking to somebody that's been doing this for a long time, and should go that route instead. Have that strategist come in to say, okay, let's analyze everything that you want to do with your podcast. How do you want to utilize it for your brand? What do you want it to serve? What audience are you trying to speak to? Who is your target list? All of these items that sometimes get overlooked because everybody thinks having the best microphone is the number one priority. It's reverse engineering the long-term thought process that many people have had. Yeah. But overall, having that solid foundation in place gives you a roadmap on which you can now chart this course that's going to put you in a better position and ultimately lead to the longevity that we many times, unfortunately, do not see here in podcasting. Because another thing I want to get to with you is the launch strategy, because so many people only do one episode to see what happens.
Oh my
and we
gosh.
want to knock that out. But
please don't do that. Just don't do it. Just don't do it. Just don't do it at all.
But overall, it's all about having the right mindset and the right strategy in place. If you can build that great foundation and do this for the right reasons, you're going to be in a much better place.
Right. And I just literally feel compelled, it's on my heart to say this, is that we are strategists. Like, you have an amazing VIP day that you do that really sets people up for success. When we work with clients, we bring them through what we call a discovery process, but it's 3 strategy sessions that are focused on, and they always think it's going to focus on the format first, but that comes second, not first. We are always going to focus on the business why of you're doing the podcast. And then the second session does build the format. But when we're talking about building the format, to your point and my point about strategy, that's very specific things that are going to go into the show that are going to drive business revenue and conversions and leads and sales. And then the third is around marketing support and distribution and how to monetize and all of those things. But I really want to say, for people who are listening to this, these aren't just 2 strategists going, you should do business with us.
Not at all.
It's 2 people that are very convicted about where you allocate your funds and being strategic and smart about that, so that, and I love what you said about the longevity, because a podcast right now is not just a podcast in its solo existence, especially for a business owner who's trying to drive increase their bottom line. It's a content creation machine.
Absolutely.
And if you can develop a foundation and have a format and produce it in a way that gives you the versatility, like we were talking about, you don't ever have to worry about creating content outside of just showing up and recording. And I know, that's not new information today, but I think it's what people forget, because they're thinking like, well, I got a person to do my SEO over here, and I got paid Facebook and ads over here, and I get, oh, maybe I should do a podcast. It's like, yeah, but you know what? If you do a podcast, then you can optimize your SEO, create really good, authentic content for your social that you can turn into paid ads, and enhance your content creation with blogs and social and all of the things. But if you don't think it all the way through from the start, then you end up having to go back and spend more money changing how you open and close the show, changing how your show is branded, making sure it fits in with all the other ads that you're doing out, or the social media presence that you're having. And so if you get that right from the start, I just think it's just something that it's just so much more than going, they just want us to pay for their VIP day. Like, no, that's not it.
Traci, I'm learning more and more as our conversation unfolds why our mutual friend Lindsay Phillips brought us together, because we are singing the same song. It's like we're in the same choir together. I have been talking about this repurposing side of podcasting for the past year, because I think it oftentimes does get overlooked. And if you're a brand that's implementing podcasting or wants to implement podcasting, more than likely, on top of all of your other responsibilities, podcasting is never going to be as strong as those. It should be part of it, but it's never going to be what you're building your brand around. But you have a number of boxes that you're looking to check in regards to connecting with your audience and establishing authority in your space and being visible on search engines and on social media. What are you doing to create content for that? And oftentimes it's piecemealing it all together. Today we'll do a blog. Tomorrow we're going to do an email blast. Wednesday we'll do our Facebook post. Maybe we'll do a live in our, there's just so many things, but bringing it all together with a podcast gives you all your time back, because you can literally take that podcast and extract all of that content and put it to good use.
And there's a lot of technology platforms out there now that really make that even more simple for you. When we started, we actually, because we are high touch customer service, and we actually still do all the things that we always did before the AI platforms came into play. So we have actually human copywriters that write our show notes. They actually listen to the episodes. They actually write the show notes. But that's important to me, because that's the actual foundation, mission, core values of our company. But that's not to say that I'm sitting here on some sort of like antiquated soapbox going, we're not going to ever use AI. But I think you have to, again, be strategic about how does AI come into that. It can actually be efficient for you. But if you're a business owner right now and you're thinking, oh my God, I've got to really look at 2025 to figure out, because I'm paying this person to do this, I'm paying this person to do that. Really think about how you could establish your marketing budget by having a podcast be the core of that strategy. And then think of that, the hubs coming off of that are the content creation pieces. And if you are just able to create that level of content by showing up behind a mic to record once a week or every other month, or in your case, I know you're a really big advocate for doing seasons and series. We do all of those. I think, we could have an interesting dialogue around seasons versus ongoing consistency. But the reality is that if you're looking at your budget for 2025 and it does not include a podcast as your content creation repurposing tool for nothing else but that, then you're really truly wasting money. You are wasting money if you don't spend the money to get a podcast done, because it is absolutely going to drive so many efficiencies in your business. And for such a little bit of time, you get so much of your time back, and you can't put a price on that.
Bomb Squad, that is what we call a mic drop moment. Traci, I know you're not holding your mic, but you can figuratively drop it. That was perfect.
Well, thank you.
So, let's talk about all those. You brought up that point of talking about seasons versus ongoing. Obviously, I see value in both. We'll talk about both. But before we do, let's get to that strategy that I mentioned before. And
Okay.
so the scary statistic that I have brought up many times on this podcast, on my other show, Podcast Theory, as guest, because it blows my mind that this is actually in existence. 90% of new podcasts don't get beyond 3 episodes. That's craziness, right? And I truly believe if the strategist was to come into play, you would probably sing the same song with me. Why are you releasing your podcast that soon? You should have way more content in the bank before you ever go live, and your launch itself should consist of 3 to 5 episodes. I always lean towards the 5. Give your audience as much great content right out of the gates to sink their teeth into so they can learn more about what you want to accomplish with this show, what they're going to experience as they continue to listen to new episodes. And if you set yourself up properly, you've got those 5 episodes plus maybe 7 or 8 more in the bank. So if you do a weekly release, you can do the next 2 months and give yourself a nice window to get another few episodes recorded and constantly stay ahead. Versus what I believe is what many people do. Yeah, we're going to try this podcast thing, and they do 1 episode and they do this test balloon, and
it's like, oh, it didn't work.
Well, and their mindset is, well, the whole world's going to shift and change because we released this podcast and we've got all of these listeners or all of these audience members on our email list and on Facebook, and you can name all the networks that they've developed. But not all of those people are podcast listeners. So that 1 episode doesn't meet expectations. Well, clearly this doesn't work for us, and they bail. And that's where I feel we need to change the whole song in regards to how this is how this is laid out to people.
So there's so many interesting things to unpack with that. So I want to start first with the, like you were saying, like launching with X amount of episodes. And then I also want to clarify, like, my perspective on series versus ongoing content.
Yeah, we're going to do that too.
Because you made such a good, well, I think in this moment, because you made such a good point that I want to highlight it here, which is launching with 3 to 5 episodes and giving yourself the breathing space to then create another batch of 5 or 6 episodes. Like, that's, to me, that's just smart, efficient recording production strategy. Whereas when I'm saying the difference between series and ongoing, I'm thinking of a series as having like a beginning, a middle, and an end. It has, you know, anywhere from 5 to 7, maybe it could even be 10 to 13 episodes, and that it's a one and done type of mentality. And those work really well, but what we're really even need to step back a step even before and go even like at 1 level up higher about the launch strategy is this is coming back fundamentally to what is your why? Why are you doing this podcast? And if you're doing the podcast and you're a busy CFO of a fintech company, and the idea of recording episodes that release every week for infinitum is not going to be sustainable. So even if that was the recommended strategy, it's going to fail because you're not going to be able to sustain it. Bingo. So if you then in that point in time, you're like, okay, well then let's do a series focused on the consumer lending. And then we have a series on that, and it has a beginning, a middle, and end. Your listeners aren't going to be disappointed when they show up for episode 8 because you've told them in advance there's 7 episodes in this series, right? And so this is all about getting everything defined as your why on the front end. If you want to have the benefits of the ongoing content creation pieces, the consistency of releasing every week or every other week, and however that works for you, then you develop a sustainable production strategy. So maybe that's 1 day a month is your recording, and you stop down and you record 1 to 4 episodes, or you stop down twice a month and you record 2 to 4 episodes. And then you move on with your busy day, and all of that content is captured and able to be repurposed. But the launch has got to give the potential new viewers, listeners, your new audience, a chance to sample what to expect. So in our strategy is similar to yours, but slightly different in that we're going to say, You need an introduction episode to tell people all the things that I literally just said to you, like, welcome to our podcast. We're going to have great experts. We're going to do 7 series. This is going to be a special series. There'll be more series to come, but in this series, this is who you're going to hear from and how we're going to talk about it. And we're going to release it on Wednesdays. And it's going to be an evergreen first episode in that person's RSS feed and on YouTube and wherever it's placed. And then the second episode is going to be a really good quality representation of what that series is going to look like. And then maybe, let's say, from a business development perspective, you might also want to integrate a tactical toolkit solo type of episode that's a shorter form versus a longer form, right? So that third episode needs to be an example of that tactical toolkit solo episode, so that when they consume those 3, if you do it in that area, and in your case 5, you get even more content to experiment with, then the listener, you got to think about you're meeting a person in their ears, or you're meeting a person on their computer screen, but it's the exact same etiquette as it would be if you ran into them or met them at a networking function or at a cocktail party or on the soccer field with your kid. You're not just going to go, I got a podcast, you should listen. Like, that's not how you're going to do it, right? You're going to be like, I started a podcast and we're doing it this way, and I'm really excited. We're going to have so-and-so on, and we're going to interview this person. And I'm also going to do some toolkit episodes so that people can get some really good tactics. And in that point, you've created curiosity, but you've included the person in the conversation to bring them along with you. You're not just going, so I think that's, again, to me, it's all about the why, but then you can't overlook, and I think this is great that you bring this up and we are driving it home so hard, you can't overlook that sustainability is not about how many episodes you do or do not release. It's about how many you can continue to record and release to maintain a consistent schedule. Like, that's sustainability. And it has to be sustainable for the individual, because if you're not having fun doing it and there's no energy coming from you when you get behind that mic, then you might as well just not show up, because it's going to be more impactful if it just goes away. But it's also going to impact you if you show up and you're just showing up because you had to.
Yeah.
So
I've seen that happen before. It's incredibly unfortunate, but it's the reality of the situation. That's what the first 2 things I address with everybody that I connect with is the why and the time. Yeah. What is the time that you have to dedicate? And that's, to me, they're almost on equal playing fields, because if you don't,
and more important than the budget. More important than the budget.
1,000%. That's in a systematic setup of 50 some items, the mic is in the 30s. We're talking about a lot of things before we get to that point, because we have to understand what you're looking to bring to the world. And that's going to be different for everybody. But then your time and your schedule better than anybody. So how does that factor into production? How does that factor in to everything that you would have to do with things? If you have the time to do everything yourself, that's great. But most business people do not, because there's already a number of responsibilities on their plate from a business perspective, and they're trying to live their life, and they have a family and they have kids and everybody needs time. So they're never going to be able to fully chain themselves to a microphone, nor should they ever have to. Exactly. That should never be something that they're thinking about. So to me, the whole season aspect comes into play, because as a new podcaster, and this is, I went this direction with my business model because I was hearing those gurus, quote unquote, talk about 2, 3, 4 episodes a week. And again, if you have that kind of time, go for it. But the majority of us don't. But if they're out there saying this is how you succeed, and then a new podcaster hears that and says, okay, well, that's what they're telling me, and I have to do that. And then they get into it and realize that's not sustainable. All of a sudden, now that's why we have that huge, scary 90% don't get beyond 3 episodes number out there. To me, it was, we got to find some common ground here.
I agree.
That's why I started saying, if you're a brand new podcaster starting with a season and building it around a specific subject area within your business, within your brand, so you can be incredibly focused, but also create an asset that serves your brand, tells people who you are and how you can help them, At the same time you're doing that, you're getting comfortable, you're learning the process, you're getting acclimated to podcasting. You'll also have tangible data that you can look at once the season's out and you've done some marketing and some promotion. You can get listener feedback. You can see where you need to make tweaks, and you're not overwhelming yourself right out of the gates and setting yourself up for that collapse. Instead, you're doing it in a wise, efficient manner. And from there, you can continue to grow because the foundation has been laid.
Yeah, you know, it's so interesting. And I don't share this story very often because it doesn't come up, but I was one of those, again, I shared that when I was building out my first podcast, I had never, as much as I love radio, and this is 2015, I had actually never listened to a podcast, right? So
Yeah.
what was interesting about, and that's the part I don't share very often, but here was my reality at the time. I knew I wanted a podcast, and I knew I wanted it for all the reasons that you're saying. But I'd never actually even listened to a podcast, but I knew enough about radio that I knew I wanted whatever my podcast was going to be, it needed to be a radio show. So, but I did exactly what I was that person that you're talking about. I went online, I Googled, I was like, how to get in new and noteworthy. Well, at the time, and it's still true for today, nobody knows how to get into new and noteworthy because no one tells you. But people will put a clickbait headline. If you want to get into new and noteworthy, or if you want to you have to release 10 episodes, you have to have them in the bank, you have to do this, you have to do that. And in my personal experience, I had 10 fantastic episodes that I released all at once. And I lost so much momentum because I overloaded people. And you got to also kind of remember, this is 10 years ago. So people at this point in time, people were still like, what is a podcast? You're doing a podcast? Like, even when I started producer podcast, they're like, what? And so, but the real strong point I want to make on this is that as it applies in today, 2024 standards, if you're not sure what you're going to do with those 10 episodes and you release them, it overloads people's feeds. They don't have time to consume all 10. So because I didn't understand at the time, I released all 10, and then the next week I released 11, and then I released 12, and then and so I wasted all of those resources, all of that content creation opportunity, all of those things because I overloaded people. No, I don't believe that about 5. I think 3, 5, even 7 is probably okay. Again, if you're communicating the point of it, if it's kind of like Netflix binge model. Yeah, but that wasn't what mine was. Mine was designed to be an every week or every other week podcast that I dumped 10 episodes into someone's feed unsuspectingly. Yeah. And they were just like, whoa, enough already with the journey to there. Like, can we walk on the path instead of run for a second? And so that was a really big learning curve moment for me personally, because I didn't really have the opportunity or optimize the opportunity to leverage that over 10 or 12 weeks, which would have made people so much happier. The show would have grown so much more organically. By the way, I did not get into new and noteworthy by doing that. And so I bring this up because I was once the person who's now thinking they want to start a podcast and going online. And there's a lot of stuff out there. And I'm not saying it's wrong or it's right, but it's got to be right for you. And that's where you've got to be able to learn what works best for you and how that you can do it. And like, I love what you were saying in terms of like, your time, your why and your time before your budget, because that budget is something that can be adjusted, and that can be something that can be flexible. But if you got to get the why right, and my why at the time, I guess, was, and looking back and sharing this conversation in a way I've never shared it before, I guess I just really wanted that new and noteworthy. Like, I was like, we're going to get it. But I would have been so much better off just to have had a 3-month breather to really let those episodes grow and foster on their own.
Yeah. And we learn from our mistakes. And I can tell you, my why was even less or even more diluted than wanting to get on a new and noteworthy list. I was doing it out of spite. I've told this story before. I started podcasting, and it's funny how the journey is all played out over the year. When I think back all the way to college, I did radio in college, thought about pursuing it as a career. It never panned out. So 13 years go by from graduating college to getting into podcasting. The only reason I got into podcasting is because some guy started trolling me on Twitter about this mobile app that I had launched for beer drinkers here in Pittsburgh, telling me how terrible it was, telling me what a horrible job I had done. And when I went and looked at his profile to find out why this guy could have an opinion about this, I discovered he was the host of a beer podcast. And the timing could not have been better because my friend and I had been kicking around ideas about starting a podcast, didn't know what
and
to
you're
do.
like, I will kick yours.
I called his and said, we're going to do a beer podcast. We're going to do it better than that guy. And my friend was on board and we started it. And I was humbled within the first episode. I'm like, oh my God, this is because I had that chip on my shoulder. I did radio. This is going to be this natural transition into podcasting. It was not. Like I said, first episode, we're doing it in a noisy bar. We didn't have a format. We didn't have the why. We didn't have anything.
Right.
And that's why I feel I can tell people, listen, this is how I started. But one thing that happened for me, it clicked. I knew. I'm like, wow.
Well, you had that radio in your blood.
Exactly. So I
knew just got reignited.
I remember saying to myself, this was awesome, but you've got to get better at it. You can't just do this. You've got to work at it. And so that was 10 years ago. And that, to me, that was, it's a unique story, but looking back on it, I don't know if that podcast would have continued on if we would have taken the time to establish a better why or even talk to a strategist that may not have even been in existence in 2000.
Well, exactly, right? Because I would have found one if they had. So one caveat that I do want to share with that, because I think it's also important for your audience to know, tongue in cheek, yes, did I want to get new and noteworthy? I did, but that's an ego play. My why actually that really drove wanting to start Journey to There was because I actually had the idea for a book. And I knew myself well enough to know that I am a talker. I am not a typer. And so I was working on this business development project with Weight Watchers International at the time, doing business development strategy for their in-person meeting model, which was a fascinating project. And out of that came the idea for the book that I wanted to write, which is Journey to There, the intersection between personal and business growth. But I knew this was like my fourth book idea, like really good book ideas, like stop in the airport, pick it up in the bookstore kind of good book ideas, but I'd never written any of them. Yeah. So I'm like, okay, I can do a podcast and then those will be the chapters that then I will turn into the book. And then I will also be able to market and build an audience and build, because for all the time that I'd spent in radio and all the time that I'd spent doing business development strategy and working with entrepreneurs and Fortune 500s, I'd never built my own list. I didn't own my own email newsletter list. I didn't take the time because I was building your email list. I wasn't building my email list. Right. And so I say all this to everyone who's, again, if you're kind of thinking like, well, would a podcast work for me? Well, if you have a book in you, then you got to start just verbalizing it. And then you get the transcriptions. And speaking of series versus ongoing, one of my most favorite podcasts that we've produced in over 10 years is a podcast called Finding Forgiveness. And it's, a family fairy tale. It's called Finding Forgiveness, a family fairy tale. And the entire why for this client was because she wants to write the book about forgiveness. And it had to do with her experience with her mom passing away. And she had so many things she wanted to share. She couldn't share them while her mom was still alive. But then during the year after her mom passed away, she just worked through all of these things around forgiveness. And so when we produced her show, which did have a business model attached to it, because ultimately she is going to release the book, she's going to build a community, she's going to do retreats around forgiveness, and help people through grief. Like it's going to be this really beautiful business development opportunity. But it had chapters. It had a beginning, a middle, an end. Mm-hmm. She told her whole story. It's out there. People can listen to it. They can consume it. They can get inspired by it. And when she's ready to release the book, she'll have this audience that's already just endeared to her for the stories that she shared through her podcast. So I wanted to really kind of wrap that in a bow, because I didn't want to leave that piece hanging out there, because there are so many reasons to have your why. It doesn't just have to be about increasing your bottom line. Mm-hmm. It can also be about you can change the world. You can change a person's life. Your message, your voice, your expertise, your passion, whatever it is that you have to say can make a difference to one person, and that ripple effect you will never know. But if you will never have it if you don't do it.
Absolutely. And you
So
never know,
that's my
never know who's
boom
listening.
mic drop.
There
I'm
you
gonna
go.
boom drop
You got a
that one.
couple of those tonight. Look, real quick.
Well, I stole that one. I claimed it for myself, but I don't know.
Well, real quick, did you end up releasing that book?
I have not released that book, but what is it?
Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you go ahead.
I was going to say, we had Nicole Eaton, who joined me a few episodes back. She had the same thing with her podcast. It started off as the home for her audiobook that never really became the book. It lived there on that podcast. The first 16 episodes are the audiobook version of her book. And it's a great mechanism for bringing those words out of your head. And like you said, a lot of us can talk it out, but trying to type it out, that's a struggle. And I know there are companies that I've connected with in the past that do that very service, where they will interview you and they will get those words out, and now they've got it recorded and they can transcribe it and then ultimately turn it into your book. I think talk about content repurposing. That's another layer that doesn't get enough love.
Right. And do you know what I love about this conversation is all about timing, because I've guested on podcasts, multiple times just this calendar year. And my story around Journey to There is no one ever asked me about it. I never usually talk about it. It's kind of like, oh, you started a podcast production company because you started Journey to There. Mm-hmm. But I feel like that it is coming back to a full circle moment, because, and this is also just for any business owner out there, here's another tip for you. Like, I am a mentor, and for a lot of other people coming up in this industry, but I also seek out mentors, and I also have a business coach, and I have people that I talk to that because sometimes I feel like if I'm talking to myself, I'm just talking to a crazy person. So I seek out advice and counsel and all of those things, which I think every entrepreneur should. So just today, literally today in this moment, with my business coach that I adore, the whole book came back up. Yeah. And the idea, because all the chapters that I've written are all still there, and how I wrote them is in terms of, like, I had to write it all pen to paper because I didn't want the disruption of the keyboard. And then I would read the chapters that I wrote and I would have them transcribed, and that's how I would edit them. Like, that was my flow. But I just am so curious universally, like, speaking, that we're talking about this. I'm almost wondering, I'm like, that book might just end up getting out there after all. So I thank you for that. And when it comes out, I'll come back on your show and say it's out.
Let's do it. No, that's a great full circle moment. I'd be happy to bring you back for another interview.
Now I feel like it's an accountability partner now, right?
No, I'm going to stay on you about that for sure. Well, I'm looking at the clock too, and we're coming up on the end of our time, and I feel like we can easily keep going another hour, but we'll definitely bring you back for a sequel when season 3 goes live. Not putting any pressure on you to say the book has to be done by then, but
hey, give me a timeline. I love a deadline, so give me a timeline, maybe. What happened though is Journey to There launched, and I loved the process of podcasting so much that the podcast launched on March the 8th of 2016, and we had our first producer podcast client by the spring. Like, I was like what you said, like when you did your podcast and you're like, it just hit me. Like when I launched Journey to There, it was like, I do love this podcast, but I love the fact that I could give this experience to so many other people. And Producer Podcast has really been the absolute best decade of my professional career, of getting to do what it is that I love. And so if I do write the book, if I don't, if it ever, but it led me to this, and this is what I love. So
yeah. Well, as we learned, the audio is in your blood, and it really became a big part of your life, which is great. So there's 2 more things that I want to talk about before we wind down tonight, Traci. Okay. One being the monetization angle. And we'll do this slightly rapid fire, but when it comes to monetization, where do you feel people are missing the mark, and what can they do to keep it realistic? Even in the very beginning, there are strategies they can put into play where they can monetize even to a small degree. What is your advice for someone that wants to go down that path?
Yes. So the biggest myth buster is that you have to have 10,000 downloads per episode to start monetizing your show. That's a factual statement when you're talking about the cost per thousand model or the CPM model, because if you stop down your show and you don't have 1,000 listeners or more, no one's going to really retire off $24, which industry standards are like $24, $28, $23, $25 cost per thousand, right?
Right.
I'm trying to do this fast. So I'm like, okay. So That's the biggest myth, is like, I have to wait till I have big audience numbers before I can monetize my podcast. Like, that's just like, no, if I had a big red X, I would put it right here. You can monetize with an audience that is quality over quantity, because they are showing up for you, for your content, what you're putting out there. And there are brands or vendors that you work with, or someone in your network who already knows, likes, and trusts the quality of your work, that wants to be aligned with you and wants to reach the audience that you access. So we have success stories that are a mile long of people with audiences of 1,500 downloads or less, in some cases 350 downloads or less, who have brought brands into their shows because it's that quality. The conversions, you don't need as many people to take an action and have those results. The second thing is that so how to start, like where to start and how to start now. Start by putting your own products and services in your shows, because it does two things. One is it's your oceanfront property. So showcase yourself in your oceanfront property first, but that also gives other people the idea that you're open for sponsorship, and how it would think, and it gives them the idea to visualize, or to hear, or to see. I mean, we're visual, conceptual people. Like, we don't ever want to be the first person. So if they're hearing your products and services marketed inside your show, it gives them a good idea of what it would be like to market inside your show. But you also start getting data and conversions on your own. So it gets that data supersedes how many audience members you have, because you can say, I've been marketing my online course, my consultants business, my VIP days, like whatever it is that you've been marketing inside your podcast. If you can track the conversions of your own products and services, that's data that then you can go to a brand and say, this is what's been working for me. I can tangibly tell you that it's powerful and it works. And then also too, the third thing is that outside of starting with your own products and services, like start with putting a special segment inside your podcast that's sponsorable, like tactical tools or takeaways, or just a special nugget that you can then repurpose for content, but you can also just sell that tiny sponsorship first and then expand from there.
I love all those.
Okay,
ideas.
that was like a 30-minute conversation packed into 30 seconds.
You did great, and I think that the important thing to remember there is not to think that you have to eat the whole elephant in one bite. If you've got somebody that's willing to make a small investment that, if nothing else, maybe just offsets some of your production costs, that's great. And in the very beginning, that's way more than many people ever get to in regards to monetization. So don't think that millions of dollars is the only gauge of success when it comes to sponsorships and bringing that type of thing into your podcast.
Exactly.
One thing I wanted to touch on, because it's something I need to know more about. I just learned about it in the last couple of days. You're the co-founder of the Podcast Professionals Association.
I am.
I want to hear more about how that all came together. And I think members of the Bomb Squad that are looking to leverage podcasting on a professional level, from what I've learned up to this point, sounds like this is a great organization to be a part of. So tell us how this all came together and how it would benefit a professional podcaster.
I am so thankful and excited that you asked about it. So it was launched on International Podcast Day, September 30th of 2024. So it is very, very new. But it's been
2 days ago?
Yes.
Oh, I didn't realize it was that new.
Well,
okay.
That's the official PR launch. But the backstory, since you ask, is it's been I had the idea in 2019, and I was actually listening to the Edison research data, and the presenter said, you know what podcasting industry needs? It needs a trade organization. It doesn't have a trade organization. So I went online and I got all the domains. I'm like, I'm going to do the trade organization. And 2019, the 2020 did not turn out like everybody thought it would. So
what happened then? No, I'm curious.
Right. So I was basically like everybody else in 2020 on. So, but I've never lost the seed of the idea. And then I kept thinking I'm watching the time. Then I kept thinking someone else is going to do it. And they didn't do it. And so I'm like, this industry needs a trade organization for podcast service professionals. So that is the key, that if anyone takes away, the reason is that We are the people who are bringing these podcasts to the world. The better quality podcasters that podcast service professionals put out, then the podcasters get more reach, make more impact, grow their audiences, can monetize. It feeds the whole ecosystem.
Mhm.
And there was no nonprofit. So we're 501c6, but there was no nonprofit trade organization to even help us get things like mortgages. Like there's no category for podcast producer if you're applying for a mortgage, like advocacy. But more importantly, I said this earlier about my business coach and having a mentor and being a mentor. Like we need to lift each other up. This is a tough business. We're in a tough industry. The industry is changing, it's evolving. But what we're doing in the world is changing people's lives one voice at a time. And it starts with a podcast service professional. And we need an organization that lifts us up, that gives us the opportunity to come together and talk about our pricing and how we're scaling or what challenges we're facing, or are you doing audio and video or just audio, or how are you making that switch? How are you managing your systems? Like those conversations need to be had in a safe container so that the whole industry lifts up. So our tagline is basically, let's grow this industry together. But I'm so excited we did it. I have a co-founder. That's what really put me over the edge, is because I did not want to do this by myself. I didn't want to be the face of it. I didn't want to be like, I just wanted to make a difference to podcast service professionals so they stay in business, so they stay producing podcasts and that everybody makes a living. And then I found this amazing co-founder, Jen Trepic, and we worked together in other capacities for about 2.5 years before we decided to do this together. And it's alive and well. We have a founder circle. We have members. And we want you to be a member, and we want people listening to the Bomb Squad to join, because we need to grow this industry together.
I love that you're leading the charge on this. It's something that I feel that we absolutely need. I know I was at one point looking for organizations like this, and I feel like it can do so much to bring people together. And I'll reference Lindsay Phillips, who was a guest here in season 2, who brought us together, and she had made that post where this is the first I had heard about your new association, where she, for International Podcast Day, listed off all of these great people that do these amazing things in the podcast space. And the comment I left was, this would be great if we could get everybody together that's on this list just to have a little powwow. And then all of a sudden I learned Traci's already making this happen. So
we have 2 events a month. So
yeah.
2 virtual events, and one's called the Wisdom Forum, which are like water cooler conversations, kind of like what we're having right now, but deeper dive. And then we also have an Inspire and Inquire event that is like a 20-minute presenter and then Q&A after that. But you get member profile listings, like your business is for SEO and discovery. You have the opportunity to have your own profile page, and it can link to your portfolio so that you can get clients from it. And then the networking piece of it, and just the camaraderie of being able to not be in your own like bubble. It just to be able to have, I love one of the Founder Circle members said, I want to go to a place where I can talk about my clients, not to my clients. So we were we took the Founder Circle feedback for a year, very, very to heart. And what does this organization need to be, and how does it need to evolve and grow so that it can really serve the podcast service professionals? So everything was done meticulously in terms of not just my opinion or Jen's opinion, but the Founder Circle opinion. And now the members all weigh in on everything. And it's just been fantastic. I'm so excited about it. I feel like I did. Produce Your Podcast was one of the very first full service podcast production and marketing agencies, because I looked around for one when I wanted to launch my own show, and it didn't exist for what I was looking for. And now I feel like I'm kind of getting that chance to re-innovate again, because I looked around for 5 years and no one else did it. So I was like, okay, I guess I'm doing it. We're doing it. And when I say we, I mean the industry, like us together, we're doing it. So I'm just the conduit. I'm like the facilitator. I just show up and I bring the cheerleading and the structure, but it's the movement is from the membership.
Good. Well, I know we'll be talking more about that when the mics go cold here, because I definitely want to learn more. But as expected, Traci, this has been a phenomenal conversation, and I want to thank you for taking the time to bring all your experience and all your wisdom to Let's Blow This Up. I'm sure the Bomb Squad wants more, so let them know how they can connect with you, learn more about who you are, what you do, and the value you can provide them.
Well, thank you for that. So the very best, easiest, most simple way to connect with me is to go to produceyourpodcast.com. If you do that, you'll have the opportunity to connect with me. But we also have a tremendous amount of resources available through blog posts, and there's samplings of our work. So if you wanted to check out, like, what does she mean by, like, you can listen to some of the shows that have sponsorship integrated into them. You can just really take all the things that we put out there and really see good, tangible examples of us walking the walk and talking the talk. And there's opportunities if you want to connect and schedule a call, of course, like no charge whatsoever. I love, obviously, to talk about podcasting. So if you want to have that conversation with me, you can connect with me at produceyourpodcast.com. And I guess normally I would only just say that one. But if you are interested in the Podcast Professionals Association, I would be remiss if I didn't tell you that that website is podcastprofessionalsassociation.com, podcastprofessionalsassociation.com. So you can get me either place.
I was even going to break the rules and do more than one call to action as well, because I always include the links in the show notes, and I wanted to let everybody know, listening and watching, that's going to be in there as well, because I think this is a great organization and we need great podcasters to keep propping it up. So I'll be clicking on that link soon, and I advise you to do the same. But Traci, this has been, oh yeah, please.
Can I just tell you that I love you're a one call to action guy? That we didn't talk about that today, but just have one call to action. It's all you need. Just one. But we did break our own rules, but for good reason. I think there are exceptions to rules, and today was a good one. But I love you for being a one call to action kind of guy.
Oh, that cereal aisle effect, when you start naming off 20 places that people can find you, they're not going to any of them. They're checking out. So
they're not.
One primary place. That's all you need to do. Makes life easier for you.
I think we were meant to be friends.
I think so too. Was it Bogart? This is the start of a beautiful relationship. I'm pulling out Casablanca lines here. I'm going way back in time.
Oh, all right.
Well, that is a great way to wrap up this installment of Let's Blow This Up. As you know, Bomb Squad, we are here every Wednesday at 7:00 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube with fresh episodes. We'll be back next week with my main man, Ian Hoover. Ian is a real estate investor here in Pittsburgh, PA. He's used podcasting to elevate his business. He's going to tell us his story and a whole lot more. So don't miss that. Make sure that you are following on YouTube and all the platforms. Click the bell on YouTube so you get a notification. Podcast version goes live every Friday. Until our paths cross again, for Traci DeForge, my name is Jason Sircone. This has been Let's Blow This Up. Until next time, stay explosive. We'll see you next week.